Episode 279. Misty Winston.
Misty Winston, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you so much for being back on. I'm actually starting my 10th season and coming back from a little bit of a hiatus, so I appreciate you being on the show. And, you know, I have basically a year worth of stuff to catch up on. And one thing that I know that you were really involved with over the past several years was the Julian Assange case. And earlier this year, Julian Assange finally achieved his freedom. So I just was hoping if you could kind of update us all on what happened with that case. Obviously, he was in prison for several years. How was he finally able to get free? Now he's in Australia. How was that able to happen? And just what are your thoughts on that movement that happened around Assange's case?
Yeah, so he was obviously in prison for over 5 years, a little over 5 years, in horrific conditions. Belmarsh is often called the Guantanamo of the UK, and for good reason. It is a terrible place to be. And being in that situation for anybody is terrible. He also has a lot of obviously extenuating circumstances, being autistic, having underlying health issues, things like that. So he was in a really bad place for, those 5 years. Prior to that, obviously not in a great place either, essentially being in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years with no freedom to move outside of that building at all, no access to direct sunlight, no access to proper medical care, very limited access to the outside world or to his family. Very often his, internet would be cut off or his communications would be cut off and things like that. So what all of that amounts to is essentially being subjected to psychological torture for over a decade. So even going into Belmarsh, he was in a really bad place. And then to spend 5 years in Belmarsh, he was obviously not doing great. He had a mini stroke at one point during one of the hearings, and his health had been declining for some time. So it was, great to hear that he was finally released. And that came about, honestly, through a lot of moving parts. I think very clearly we have to give credit to his legal team, who were working for a very long time behind the scenes, excuse me, as much as they could, to work with, the various powers that be that were involved in this situation. And they were working to try to get that kind of deal set up. I'm not a fan of the deal. For people who don't know, he ended up signing a plea agreement where he pled guilty to one count. And I'm not a fan of that deal. He shouldn't have to plead guilty to anything. He didn't do anything wrong. But I also understand why that deal was created, and I understand fully why Assange signed it. I think that, as I mentioned, his health was declining for a long time. He has two young sons who, until recently, didn't know him outside of prison. So he had a lot of reasons personally to sign that plea agreement. It does make things very complicated moving forward in terms of fighting for press freedom. But to be honest, it really doesn't change a lot in terms of that fight, because that fight was already going to be ahead of us anyways, just simply because of what they've been able to do to Assange up until this point. So it really wasn't the plea agreement that set the precedent. Really, it was just him being arrested in the first place and having this case drawn out for as long as it was. So while I'm not a fan of the plea agreement, I also recognize that it was necessary in order to save his life. And now that he's free, I think that lifted a weight off of a lot of us, because I feel like a lot of us were holding our breaths. Those of us who are involved in the press freedom and free speech movement, I think a lot of us were holding our breath, constantly wondering if we were going to wake up and hear the news that he had died in prison. So with him now being free, I think that frees a lot of us up from that pressure of, spending that much time fighting for his freedom and for saving his life. And now we can focus on, what we need to do moving forward in terms of the future press freedom and free speech.
You mentioned his legal team. Obviously, there were a lot of people surrounding that case advocating for him to be released. Just wondering if you could mention, who do you think was really influential in kind of helping generate that grassroots
Oh
movement?
gosh, so many people. I think probably Jennifer Robinson is sort of, she led the charge, but there were so many in multiple different countries. I mean, he had a legal team to deal with the stuff in Ecuador. He had a legal team in Spain to deal with the UC Global stuff. He had a legal team in the United States. There was a legal team in Australia. There was a legal team in the UK. So there were people working on that really across the globe. But I think really Jennifer Robinson over the course of the past, I mean, she's been with him forever. So I think that she was probably the one who really, was the head of the beast there, so to speak, and trying to organize all of those fights and keep everything moving forward.
And as far as Assange himself, obviously, and he was released, he's at home in Australia. Has he made any kind of public statements? And just moving forward, do you think that he will kind of return to the public spotlight, or do you foresee him really just living the rest of his life in private?
Well, I mean, we've gotten sort of conflicting information on that. Once the plea agreement was signed, Stella made the statement that he is going to continue to fight the fight and all of that stuff. And just know, and I've never met Assange personally, so I don't know him. I don't mean to imply that I do, but from what we know of him, I don't feel like he's somebody that would shy away from the fight. Obviously, he has been through a lot, so it's really difficult to say. I do get in a lot of trouble because I have been pushing a little bit on that front because I do think it's a little strange that he hasn't said anything. We've heard nothing from him directly. And just from, following him for so long, he has often said, don't take anything from third parties as a statement from me. Only if it comes directly from me, then you know that it's true. And so I've always been kind of a stickler for that. And I recognize that he has been through a lot and needs time to adjust to. I mean, I can't imagine what he is possibly going through, being in Belmarsh for over 5 years and then suddenly being free. And now not only are you free, but you're a parent to two very young boys. I'm sure that adjustment is pretty immense. We've seen some pictures that have been released, but he's not made any public statements. And I do think that's a little strange. And I have pushed on that a little bit because I feel like even like a pre-recorded message, like, hey, I'm doing okay. Thank you for everything. I'm resting. You'll hear from me soon. Something like that, I think I would think would be expected. But we haven't seen anything like that yet. So hopefully there will be something from him soon. Whether it's, a video message or an interview. I don't know if maybe they're just holding out to get, that kind of exclusive interview deal. That's also very possible. So, but hopefully we will hear from him soon.
So, just on the larger subject of censorship, looking back the last few years, it seemed as though there was a lot of censorship, especially around COVID. Donald Trump's stolen election claim for a while, that was, if you said anything about that, you'd have your video removed off of YouTube, or, a lot of demonetization, especially around the war in Ukraine. So, censorship has really been prevalent for several years now, but seemed to be especially bad, 2 or 3 years ago. Since that time, we've had Elon Musk purchase Twitter and rebrand it as X. We've had the advent of Rumble, and it seems as though, just at face value, there's seemingly a little less censorship. There's people who are, have a platform now who didn't, who were deplatformed, like Alex Jones, for example. And it seems as though they're kind of been let back into the mainstream, or at least the mainstream right, these sort of conservative sort of social media platforms, it seems. Obviously, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are not really heroic figures at all. But I just kind of would be curious on, what your thoughts are on that generally. Do you think that do you think that there's a little more free speech now than there was, or is it sort of just a limited hangout?
Yeah, it's a limited, in my opinion, it's a limited hangout. I think Elon Musk, really, the censorship has just shifted. It's different people are being censored now. So instead of the Alex Joneses, it's people. I mean, just this week, Max Blumenthal was magically locked out of his account for reporting on the alleged shooter, the alleged assassin attempt. And he was just locked out of his account for asking questions. Garland Nixon has been locked out of his account for over a year. I mean, just recently we had two Assange supporters who don't break terms of service. These are very nice people. They're not me. Like, I am sure I break terms of service at some point. You know what I mean? I go pretty hard on Twitter, but we've had Assange supporters over the course of the years who have been suspended, banned, whatever. I'm heavily shadow banned. I know a lot of other Assange supporters have been heavily shadow banned. That's not as prevalent now that he's free, but since Elon took over until his freedom, I mean, all of us were heavily shadow banned. So I don't think that really there's any less censorship. I think that censorship has just shifted to a different demographic. And I think that that's what is so dangerous about Elon Musk, because he has convinced a lot of people that he is the savior of free speech. And he is very much not that. He doesn't believe in free speech. He believes in free speech that he agrees with. And I think that is what makes him very dangerous, because he genuinely has a cult following. And I have to deal with that on a regular basis because I very frequently call him out for the censorship and criticize him on a regular basis, not just for the censorship, but also for his various shady connections and his nefarious dealings and the numerous lucrative contracts that he has with the military industrial complex and the Department of Defense and intelligence and governments around the globe and all of the things that he, is invested in and involved in. The cult following, and I hate to say cult following because I feel like the word cult gets thrown around a lot. But it is kind of a cult of personality. In their eyes, he can do no wrong. And how dare you even suggest that he is not who he claims to be? And they think that he is really on their side and he's fighting for them and he's going to be the guy that saves free speech. And in fact, many of them believe that he already has. And so I think that if you are from the demographic that benefits from Elon Musk's ideology and the way that censorship for those people has been diminished slightly, I think that you probably agree with that, but that's because you live in your bubble. But I live in a world where I'm looking at all the sides and I see the way that he continues to censor people on a regular basis. And in fact, they admit to it, right? I mean, you have Linda Yaccarino out here talking about it's not freedom of speech, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. Like that's not free speech. That's not how that works. So it's like built into their whole MO and the way that they operate Twitter, that it's not actually free speech. And they are censoring people and they are suppressing certain information that they don't agree with or that doesn't go along with whatever narrative that they're pushing. So no, I don't think Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are going to save free speech. And I think they're very dangerous characters.
Yeah, and one thing that didn't really get addressed around the whole Twitter files situation was not just that the FBI was contacting Twitter, and that's really what got the headlines, but the fact that there are a lot of former FBI, former CIA, former in quotes, who still work in
Yes.
content curation, not just at X, but also Facebook and Instagram and all these other social media networks. So, that's a little disturbing. And honestly, even if you looking back, Elon Musk was defending that, saying that he was a supporter of the FBI. So, which, obviously, again, he would have to be. He's the richest man in the world. He's part of the military industrial complex.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just, I think I agree with you as far as him, having this sort of persona as fighting for the underdog. How can the richest man in the world really be fighting for the underdog?
Yeah, it makes no sense. And the Twitter files, there was a lot of things wrong with that. I mean, it was very clearly a controlled release of information. I'm not a fan of the way that that works. That's why I like WikiLeaks so much, is that it's not, I mean, obviously they do there's a redaction process and there is a bit of curation, but I mean, this was, hey, here's some screenshots of some things that we've decided we want you to see. And everybody took that just at face value, or not everybody, but a lot of people took that at face value and tried to pretend like this was some major leak that was revealing all kinds of, and it's what Elon wanted you to see. And so I think that there's a lot of things going on there. And I mean, listen, I'm not saying anything new. I mean, Whitney Webb has done extensive work on Elon Musk and his various nefarious dealings. So, and many people have, not just Whitney. She's just one that I've learned a lot from. So, I think it's very strange to me that people hold him up as some like beacon of free speech and democracy, especially as a free speech activist. That's very strange to me. But here we are. And it's something that we're going to have to continue to, that narrative will be something we have to continue to fight back against as he, continues to silence people.
And I'm just waiting for him to tell us that the only way to defeat the woke mind virus is to get Neuralink.
Yeah. I mean, does anybody want an Elon Musk chip in their head right now after everything we've seen over the past couple of days? I didn't want one before. I sure as hell don't want
Yeah,
one
right.
now.
Well, on that subject, so again, over the last several days, Israel has been attacking Lebanon, making these wireless devices explode. First, it was pagers, then it was walkie-talkies and cell phones. And there's been, a lot of discussion around how this was achieved, if it was a supply chain attack, if they were inserting explosives. Some folks were wondering, are they able to just make lithium batteries explode? But it's been pretty horrific. And equally horrific, I think, is the reaction that we've seen from many folks. We've seen folks laughing about it, making jokes about it. And if you just look at the actual effects of what happened, it wasn't just Hezbollah who was, injured and killed by this. It was small children died. There was just mass chaos. And it really, seemed to be an act of terrorism by Israel. So just I don't know, what do you have to say about the attacks themselves and the reaction to it?
I mean, it is a new low for Israel. I mean, but let's be very clear. Are you on YouTube? Because I don't want to get you in trouble. And I
Uh,
know how,
yeah, I
I know.
mean this would be on YouTube and Rumble, but
Okay.
if you want to, feel free to say whatever, and I could
I
just
just always feel very bad. I have a big mouth and I say things very openly, and I don't ever want to get anybody their platform taken down because of something I've said. So I'll try to dance around it a little bit. Israel is exactly what they claim Hamas and Hezbollah are. You know what I mean? That's it, every accusation is in fact a confession. And this is, I don't think there's any way that you can look at these attacks objectively and not say that they are an act of terrorism. There's just no way. You are setting off explosions in amongst civilian populations. Civilians have in fact been injured and killed. And they know that that's what's happening, that they're very clear and aware, not that they haven't been attacking in those ways in civilian populations for months now, almost a year, slaughtering thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, according to some reports, of innocent civilians. So this should not surprise anyone. You know, the levels of depravity that we are dealing with are pretty intense. And I don't think that they care much at all about they really have been operating with impunity for a very long time. And I feel like they think that they are above the law. Very clearly they are. There's been some attempts recently to hold them account in some legal fashion. Obviously, that's not really going anywhere. But I think that these attacks are horrific. I think that anybody with any level of humanity should be actively fighting against it and speaking against it. And what I think is so telling, excuse me, is that, as you mentioned, the jokes. Like I saw somebody, I know Caitlin Johnstone has gotten them. Hey, do you have your pager on you? Somebody, it might have been, I don't remember who it was, but somebody got a tweet saying paging so and so. It might have been Piers Robinson. But there's a lot of these jokes going around now, you know, about you know, just regular people who are covering the situation in Israel, and they're making jokes about potentially blowing these people up. And then that's what we're dealing with. And we're seeing the way that these false claims of anti-Semitism have been weaponized. We're seeing the way that they are trying to make it illegal to even speak out against the state of Israel. That's been going on for a very long time. There's anti-BDS laws in several states. There's several other laws in various stages of development throughout the country. And that's always been happening. I mean, as a free speech activist, that's something I've been pretty aware of over the years. But yeah, it's horrific what's happening. And I think that anybody who is watching this needs to step back and objectively look at it. And I just don't know how you can laugh about an innocent 9-year-old, you know, being blown up just because she happened to be standing next to the wrong person, allegedly. I mean, we don't even know for sure who all had these devices. There's been some reports that these devices are used. Frankly, they're used by, and again, as you mentioned, we don't really know for sure how this was done. We don't know if it was a supply chain issue where, you know, there was a batch that was tampered with, or if it was the battery, or however it was done. But I mean, these are pagers that are pretty widely used, especially by medical professionals. I know that there's been a lot of medical professionals in the United States even who have spoken out and said, that's the exact same pager I use as a doctor in the ER at whatever hospital in Iowa. I think and I think it really should terrify everyone, because this is a new level. This is a new way that they can attack you. You know, we've seen the way that there's been an effort over the course of the past many years. I don't remember when the pamphlet came out from DHS where they wanted to call everybody a domestic violent extremist.
Mm.
But there's been attempts to really label anybody who might care a little bit too much about one issue, or who actually wants to fight back against the establishment, or wants to speak outside the narrative, or ask questions that they don't like. There's been an effort to be able to label those people as terrorists or extremists or whatever. And so I think that this should terrify everybody, because this opens up a whole new Pandora's box in the world of terrorism. And I think that that is that's a terrifying prospect, the way that they are able to do this.
And just geopolitically, if you look at the past year, Israel has just been escalating more and more from, the
Yes.
genocide in Gaza to the assassination that took place in Iran and other assassinations, and now with this wave of terrorism in Lebanon. And it just seems as though they really are trying to start an all-out regional war, which again would drag the United States into it, right? Like if Israel goes to war with Iran, I think we can rest assured that the United
Yes.
States is going to get involved. And we kind of sent the signals to begin with sending aircraft carriers to the region and whatnot. So, do you think there's, and, just kind of going into the election a little bit, I don't think it really matters who wins.
No.
Donald Trump, I think, is maybe a little more hawkish in regards to, Israel and the Middle East. But I think regardless, no matter who's in office, if Israel decides it wants war throughout the region, then the United States is going to be involved in that war.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I think really he's only more hawkish in terms of rhetoric. Kamala Harris likes to, use pretty words, pretend that she cares about the lives of Palestinians. And AOC will tell us that she's working tirelessly towards a ceasefire as they send another shit ton of weapons to Israel to blow up Palestinian children in Gaza and the West Bank. So I think that that's really just rhetoric. I think that in terms of like practicality and actual substance, they're pretty similar in terms of the way that they would operate. But I do think Trump has been not just more hawkish with Israel. I think that he has had a pretty obvious target on Iran for some time now, and that is really, in my opinion, as you just mentioned, I think that's really the sticking point. I think that we know that Iran has been a target for a very long time. General Wesley Clark told us ages ago that there were the 7 countries in 5 years, and Iran was the last on that list. I think that it's been a target for us for a very long time, and I think that this might be the way that we are trying to build up to that and to manufacture consent for that type of a war. That I don't think that's a war that anybody should want. That only ends bad for a lot of people. Iran doesn't play. I mean, I don't know why anyone would think that that would be a good idea, but I do think that that is, where the focus is going to be shifted, Iran and probably likely China. So I feel like that's really where people need to be paying attention. And it's very frustrating to me when we have people, running around pretending like Donald Trump is somehow going to be better, that he was somehow a peace president, or that he's, an anti-war candidate or whatever. He's very much not. Neither of them are. They're both awful. They're both essentially owned and operated by the exact same people. They serve the same agenda. The only difference really is the demographic to which they pander to. So I think that that's really what we're facing. And it's a terrifying time. I mean, I don't know that people know how close we are to a catastrophic war situation. I mean, I think likely we are already in sort of the very first stages of a World War III type situation, but it could and probably will get a lot worse. And I think that you're absolutely correct. Israel has been building to that and escalating towards that. And that's really been their goal the whole time. This is the whole Greater Israel Project. So, I mean, this is, if you know what Israel's intentions have been, and you're not deluding yourself about that, then you're aware of what this whole process is really about. So, yeah, it's a terrifying time for sure.
Hey, Radicals, I hope that you're all enjoying this interview. As you know, this is the start of my spectacular 10th season. This is going to be a big one. We have lots of big returning guests, lots of new guests as well. So, really want to make sure that it's great. Please do help support the show if at all possible. You can do that in a few different ways. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me across all different social media networks. And also, if at all possible, please do consider financially supporting the show. You can do that at patreon.com/Primo Radical. When you become a patron, you can submit questions to all of my guests, so please do consider that. That's only $1 a month. Please also consider sending super chats and super thanks, and make sure again that you're just following me across all different social media networks. Thanks again, folks, for the last 9 years of support, and again, I'm looking forward to making this a great 10th season. Yeah, one of the things that Trump has been running on is trying to avert World War III. He
Mhm.
talks about what's happening in Ukraine, and rightly so, right? I mean, that is it's escalating towards World War III. If you look at the fact that there are Ukrainian troops now in Russia and they are approving missile strikes inside of Russia. So we're we're 1 second to midnight, it seems like there. But
Yeah.
the thing is, again, I think what a lot of folks don't really understand is how these countries are all interrelated, especially with BRICS nowadays. And, Russia has alliances with Iran and China. So, it seems to not really matter that much whether World War III starts in Ukraine and Russia, or it starts in the Middle East, or it starts in Taiwan. These things are all going to cascade. If one of these things goes off, then they're all going to go off.
Yeah.
So that's something that
Yes,
I think people.
that's a great point too. I think that uh a lot of people put these different things in a vacuum, like Russia, Ukraine is happening in a vacuum, and Israel and Palestine is happening in a vacuum, and the conflict, building conflict with China is happening in a vacuum, and it's really not at all. All of these things are intertwined. BRICS has been growing. These coalitions have been building against Western imperialism out of necessity. I mean, we've really forced these countries into these alliances because we have been so unbelievably awful for decades, and gallivanting around the globe, overthrowing democratically elected leaders, installing puppet dictators, stealing resources, bombing hospitals and funerals and weddings and school buses and all of that stuff. And we've, really necessitated these countries coming together to stand against Western imperialism. So we've really forced it upon ourselves. But you're right, all of these things are interconnected, and any one wrong move in any one of these situations could pop off a really, really bad situation where all of those countries, it's not just if we, go to help Israel with Iran, that's the only thing that we're going to be dealing with. We will then be dealing with Russia and China and a whole host of other countries who don't like us and have no reason to. And that's something that we've really brought upon ourselves.
And just going back to Iran and Trump, the impression I get is that there's kind of a heavy push behind the scenes to get him even more hawkish towards Iran. Obviously, he assassinated the Iranian general when he was in office, but there's these claims that his election was hacked. It's very similar to Russiagate, actually. It's sort of the
Yeah.
inverse of Russiagate. It's Irangate, where there's a claim that his campaign was hacked and information was given to Biden. And there's been these claims around the assassination attempts. Like after the first one, there was a claim that Iran may try to assassinate him. And Ryan Routh's book, he mentioned something about Iran, and folks are focusing on that now. So it seems as though there's a lot of propaganda around the scenes to try to make Donald Trump even more hawkish towards Iran if he gets in office.
Well, not just to make him more hawkish, but also, again, to manufacture that consent for if there is a situation where we go to war, whether it's in defense of Israel or for whatever other reason, people are going to be more willing to accept that situation if they think that Iran was trying to assassinate Donald Trump. So I don't buy that for a second. I have no reason to buy that. I know how propaganda works. I know how this stuff works. So I feel like that is something that information cannot be trusted. It's weird to me that people are accepting it, just at face value without even questioning it. And a lot of people are running around, a lot of the MAGA crew are running around pretending like that's legit. And but I do think you're right. I do think that that it also might be to kind of push Donald Trump into a more hawkish position. Not that he needs much pushing. Let's be real. I mean, he is a pretty hawkish guy, both in rhetoric and in practice. Again, it's very strange to me that people pretend that he was or is some sort of peace guy, or that he's going to be some sort of a peace president. That's absurd on every level. But that's just the way that it works. That's the kind of narrative that he's built around himself amongst his base. But yeah, I think that it is that's definitely being used to push him towards a more hawkish position for sure.
And on the subject of Ryan Routh, the second person who allegedly tried to assassinate Donald Trump, and again, this is an ongoing case. He was arrested. He's being prosecuted for gun charges. But the man has a very, very strange background
Yes.
where he traveled to Ukraine. He wrote a book about fighting in Ukraine and wanting to march towards Moscow and burn down the Kremlin. And just very kind of suspicious stuff. So obviously, there's a lot of kind of angles on this. One, was this just a crazy guy who got kind of pushed over the edge by media narratives around Ukraine and Putin and Trump being Hitler? Was this a guy who had contact potentially with U.S. intelligence or Ukrainian intelligence? Did he receive any kind of military training in Ukraine? There's kind of a lot of different factors here. So As you mentioned, Max Blumenthal was kind of digging into his book and posting very interesting sections of this guy's book on X before he got locked out. We know that he, met with some high profile people while in Ukraine, and he was interviewed by the New York Times and all this stuff. So, just I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts on this case overall. Do you think, we should be asking the question about if he did have contact with any kind of intelligence services, or does this just seem like a really crazy guy to you?
Well, we know he was known to authorities. Like they've already admitted that. I mean, that's the magic phrase, right? Every time there's, a mass shooter or, like the Boston bombing or whatever, we always hear the magic phrase, he was known to authorities. So that's, I mean, I literally wait for that every single time. I'm like, here it comes. It's the meme, right? Say the word or say the phrase, whatever, the Simpsons meme. And every time it crops up. So I think that there's probably going to be a lot more information that comes out about this guy in the coming days, weeks, months. Obviously, if there's a trial or whatever, we'll probably get a little bit more information. I think that it is suspect at best. It could be either way. He could be, sort of a rogue asset. He could just be some sort of crazed lunatic. That's certainly possible. There are definitely those people. I do think that there's a lot of people, saying that he's from the deep state and the deep state wants Donald Trump dead. If the deep state wanted Donald Trump dead, he would be dead. Like the deep state knows how to kill people. I mean, Donald Trump's 78 years old, obese, out of shape. I mean, it would be very easy for them to get rid of him if they actually wanted him dead. So, do I think that maybe they're just trying to cause chaos and division? That's certainly possible. I think nothing should be off the table. No question should be off the table. Everybody should be willing to engage in all of the conversations, regardless of how conspiratorial it may sound, because these types of situations, you cannot put anything past these types of people. You know what I'm saying? Like intelligence and government and all of that stuff. They are willing to do anything. And we know that. Like we know the way that they operate. This is not me, saying anything new that people don't already know. We know the way that they operate. We know that the way that they can make people disappear at the drop of a hat. They've done it numerous times throughout history. So I just think people need to keep an open mind. I think there's a lot of rushing to thinking that all the answers. And we see that every time there's a situation like this. Everybody wants to jump online and get their Twitter fingers going and pretend that they have the answer and that they know exactly what's going on, and that's just not possible in these situations. There's a lot of nuance and moving pieces, and we just don't have all the information, and frankly we will probably never have all of the information. So the best that we can do is just keep our heads and try to evaluate things as they come forward, and just remember who we're dealing with. You know what I mean?
So I also wanted to get your thoughts on the 2024 election, which is now just about a month and a half away. Obviously, things are getting pretty heated,
Yeah.
especially with these assassination attempts that we were just discussing, and just the geopolitical environment that we're in. And this has got to be probably the weirdest election ever, where you have a former president who claims that he didn't lose the last election. And also, it's Donald Trump to begin with, so he wasn't even supposed to win the 2016 primaries. Jeb Bush probably was supposed to. But you have Donald Trump running for re-election for his second non-consecutive term. Then you also have Joe Biden being forced out of the race, and really strange circumstances, because we had this debate that was held much earlier than debates are normally held. They're normally held this time of year, September, October. But they had this debate in June, and then immediately after that, we had the media calling for his resignation, or not his resignation, is him to not run again, and him saying he was going to run, and then finally just one day he endorses Kamala. So we have that whole strange dynamic, and again, just obviously with everything geopolitically, we have these third-party candidates as well. Jill Stein is currently polling in amongst Muslims. She's in first place in several states, Arizona, Michigan. So a lot of Muslims are supporting her, and many young voters and opponents of genocide. You also have Cornel West in the race. You had RFK in the race, but he dropped out and endorsed Trump. So obviously there's a lot of different dynamics going on, and it's really one of the strangest elections ever, I'd say. I know you're not really a fan of partisan politics and elections generally, but Just curious if you could kind of share your thoughts on where we stand, and just I don't know if you have any predictions kind of going into November.
It is nuts. Like, I have to say, as somebody who doesn't care about electoral politics, nor do I think that we're going to get any substantive change from electoral politics, the entertainment value is through the roof. I mean, it is every day it's something new. And I think that it's crazy to watch this. As you mentioned, we have Donald Trump, who I think, him being able to be president in the first place, I think is very telling about where we are as a country. This essentially game show host, reality star, lifelong criminal. I mean, everybody knows the way that he's conducted his business, throughout the course of his life. So I think that that's just very fascinating. The idea that he is even in consideration for the presidency, I think is very telling about the state of this country. But I think what is, to me, super fascinating about this whole situation is, as you just mentioned, Joe Biden being forced out. And I think that there's a couple things I find interesting about that. First of all, as you mentioned, the shift in media coverage pre-debate and post-debate. I mean, they couldn't have shifted their tune faster. In the days leading up to the debate, we were told that, oh, he's great. He's doing great. He's sharp as a tack. He's on it. Like, he's ready to go. And then the debate happens, and literally the second the debate ended, the tone shifted on mainstream media. CNN is like just blasting him about how he is old and incoherent and all of this stuff. I mean, that shift happened so unbelievably quickly. And that, I think, was very interesting to watch that
Yeah,
play
it's
out.
like a
And then,
memo went out during the debate or something.
right? Yes, because it normally, there would have been excuses made. There would have been some attempts to spin it. There would have been, some hemming and hawing about, oh, he just had a bad night, or he's sick, or they would have tried to find some excuse, right?
Or
That didn't happen,
just pretending he won, right?
right?
And
They do
honestly,
that.
part of what made him look really bad during that debate was that they kept doing the split screen where they were
Yeah.
showing him looking like confused every time Trump was talking. All they really had to
Yeah.
do was just not do that. Like, just stop showing him when Trump was talking, and it wouldn't have seemed
Yeah.
so bad.
Yeah, well, I think that that's interesting, the fact that they were showing him like that. So I'm always looking at all of those aspects, the way that the debate was covered, the post-debate coverage, all of that stuff. And yeah, him looking all slack-jawed and out of it certainly didn't help him. But I think that the shift in coverage was super fast and very telling. And then I think what's also interesting about that is now we have a situation where the Democratic Party has essentially anointed a candidate. Meanwhile, they are clutching their pearls and, emphatically arguing that Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. And I just don't know how you can possibly make that argument when you just shoved through a candidate for the presidency of the United States who didn't earn a single vote. You don't get to talk about democracy when that's the way that you're conducting your party. And we know that that's not, I mean, in 2016, they went into court and they said, listen, we're a private company. We can do whatever we want. We can go in a back room filled with cigar smoke and choose our candidate that way. Very famously, that's what they argued in a court of law. So anybody paying attention to that situation knew that that's the way that they conduct their business, operate their business. But I just think that the absolute disrespect and disregard that they showed to voters, you know what I mean? Not a single vote. And there was ample opportunity. And I think that that's why, frankly, they tried to push Biden through as long as they could. They wanted to make
Yeah, to
it
forego the primaries.
yes, they didn't want to have a primary. And so I think that they tried to make excuses for Biden for as long as they could, get it past the point where a primary was no longer an option, and then they were going to replace him. I think that that's really what the intention was the whole time. So now we have this fully anointed candidate for the presidency, who, by the way, ran before and had to drop out before her home state to avoid being embarrassed because nobody likes her. Nobody liked her then. Nobody likes her now. There's this weird artificial push of people liking her, and the media is all over her and things like that. But it's not organic. We all know that. So yeah, I just think that those two things about that whole situation are very interesting to me. The way that the media shifted coverage so quickly, and the way that the Democratic Party has fully anointed a candidate. So I'm not surprised that Jill Stein is leading amongst Muslims. She should be. um, Anybody who doesn't support genocide, who still believes in electoral politics, should probably be voting for Jill Stein. I am not going to vote at all. I don't think it's a worthwhile venture. I might, if there's some like local ballot initiatives or something like that, I might go and vote for that kind of stuff. But I don't bother with national electoral politics anymore. I don't think it's, I don't think it's, I think Steve Poikonen calls it a consent ritual for pedophiles or something like that. So it's just not something I'm interested in participating in at that level. So, but yeah, I think that it's a super interesting election cycle. Watching all of this play out, I do think that we are starting to see more people come to terms with the fact that there's just the one party. On war and Wall Street, there's just one party, and I think they use everything else to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. They want us angry at each other. They want the right angry at immigrants. They want the left angry at, conservatives and gun lovers and all of that stuff. Because if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we're not paying attention to the man behind the curtain. I think that that's been the goal for a very long time in electoral politics. They've been very effective at running it that way. And keeping people divided. And so I think that that's really all that this is. But I do think more people are starting to see through it a little bit, which is promising. I just don't know if it's enough. I think it's probably too little too late. We are certainly an empire in decline, as terrifying as that prospect is. We have historical reference for empires failing. We've never seen an empire this large or frankly this heavily armed fail. And that's a little terrifying. But I think we might be past the point of no return. So, as terrifying as that is, and I hate to be like a Debbie Downer or whatever, but I think that that's just the reality of where we find ourselves. So, I don't really have any predictions, as far as the election goes. I think whoever wins will be whoever power has chosen, to serve out their agenda. That's who always wins. So I think it could really go either way. I think, they are probably hedging their bets and seeing how the winds blow and seeing how people react and which way they can best push which buttons. And, it depends on what part of their agenda is more important to them in terms of geopolitics. If they want to do the more Israel-Iran route now, they'll go with Trump. There's some things that they will consider, but voters don't choose. There's no choice there. In my opinion, presidents are nothing more than forward-facing puppets for actual power. So we don't make that choice. Somebody else does. And so I think that, as hopeless as that sounds, people often get mad at me and call me a nihilist. You don't have to be a nihilist. There are things that you can do to, kind of prepare yourself, opt out of the system as much as you can, try to, learn how to grow food and like meet your neighbors, talk to your neighbors, develop relationships in your communities. There's plenty of stuff that you can do that you actually have control over. I feel like voting is very much just like it just makes you feel like you're doing something. And I don't like, if you want to go vote, I'm not telling anybody to not go vote. I wouldn't do that. Go vote. But there are lots of other things that you should be doing in collaboration with that effort. Voting is certainly not going to fix anything. We can't vote our way out of this. That's just reality. We cannot vote our way out of this.
So one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you're in Ohio, right?
Yep.
Is the whole Haitian immigrant situation and the claims around the eating cats and dogs, which obviously was really the big headline coming out of the Trump-Harris debate. So just curious if you have any thoughts on this. I don't know how close you are to Springfield, if you've heard anything from there, or just what are your thoughts on this issue overall?
So I'm about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes from Springfield east, almost directly east. So if you're looking at Ohio, Columbus is nearly dead center, and Springfield is about an hour to the west, in between here and Indiana. So, excuse me. And we have friends in Springfield. We've talked to them. I have not been to Springfield. I do intend on trying. It's hard with my schedule to even just, taking that hour trip with kids. It's a little complicated to try to find that time. But I do intend to try to drive out there and just get a feel for it myself. I like to see things for myself if possible. And considering how close I am, I feel like that's something I could do. But according to our friends, the immigrant situation there are issues. Like, there are certainly issues. You can't drop 20,000 people into small town Ohio and then not really take care of them. Money was given to the city of Springfield to help with the immigrants that were, essentially just dropped there. Nobody really knows where that money went. It certainly hasn't gone to help those people. So there are a lot of issues with the immigration, situation there. There's a lot of people who are homeless. There's a lot of people who are, struggling to find work. There's a whole lot of, it's a very tenuous situation. I feel like, I mean, anytime you drop 20,000 people into a small town just overnight, I think there's going to be some conflict, and there's going to be some, it's going to be tense. I think that's just common knowledge. I mean, that's just common sense. In terms of the cats and dogs things, I mean, I haven't, my friends have not heard anything or seen anything to that degree. But this is not the first time that we have seen this type of propaganda be weaponized against immigrants, people of color. I mean, all of that stuff. And especially given the situation in Haiti right now. I mean, I've covered that several times on my old TNT show with multiple different people. And I mean, the situation in Haiti has been ongoing for a long time. I mean, we have been mingling in their affairs for a very long time. And we are currently trying to do that now. So I think that this is also very helpful in terms of pushing that narrative. So I just think people need to be mindful of that. I'm not saying that there aren't issues in Springfield. There are. But I think that those claims have been wildly overblown in order to push a narrative. And so, and I think it's very self-serving for Trump. I mean, a lot of it has been debunked by certain people. I realize that, oh, well, the cops say that there's no, you trust the cops? No. But again, I know people in Springfield. I've spoken to them. And, I think that there's a lot of rumor and innuendo and all of that stuff, as we often see in these situations. So are there issues in Springfield? Yes, of course. But the whole eating cats and dogs thing, I think, has been wildly overblown.
Well, last question I wanted to ask you about, and kind of circling back to the subject of censorship, was Tenant Media, a venture by Lauren Chen and her husband. And, there were allegations made by the federal authorities that there was a connection there between them and effectively the Russian government, or RT, and that they were paying these content creators to effectively spout Russian propaganda. Um, I don't believe any charges have been filed against any Americans here, but just the story overall, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on it. Doesn't this in a way kind of vindicate all those folks who have been, ranting about Russian propaganda and Russiagate and them, hacking the vote and affecting our elections? Doesn't it kind of vindicate them if this is true that RT, officials may have been funding right-wing commentators in the United States?
I mean, maybe to some degree. I mean, we don't really know for sure what exactly went down. And I think Glenn Greenwald said it best. He doesn't doubt that RT might have done this, but he questions the significance of it. And I think it's interesting, the timing of this, obviously. I think that, I'm very skeptical of all of it. Again, we don't have all of the information yet. I think that we'll probably learn. And these are people that, listen, I don't like. It's like, I don't like Tim Pool. I don't like a whole host of some of the people who have been mentioned in this stuff. So it's not that I'm defending friends here. And it's not really that I'm defending them at all. I don't have all of the information yet. And I think that it's questionable the level of significance that it might have played. And I think that the timing is very interesting. And I also think that when, you're the United States of America, do you really get to wag your finger at anybody about election interference or any of that stuff? Nobody does it more than we do. And that's not me trying to diminish the, what might be fairly significant, depending on the levels to which this was happening and how it was playing out and all of that stuff, which we still don't know. Obviously, Tim Pool, I think, is suing somebody. I think I saw that the other day, that he is suing for defamation or something like that. So he's denying these claims and things like that. Of course he would, even if he were guilty of it. But I think that, this really goes back to clean your own house first, in my opinion. I think that the United States, our own mainstream media is fully operated and controlled by intelligence. There's nobody that does more election interference in this country than mainstream media, period, end of story. And we just talked about it, right? The way that they covered the Joe Biden situation, the way that they're covering Kamala Harris now, the way that there's this, I mean, this universally reviled woman who nobody likes. Nobody liked her. Like nobody likes her. And now suddenly she's incredibly popular and people love her and it's all joy and vibes. And I mean, that's very strange, right? So, and that's on the account of mainstream media. So I feel like, does Russia try to interfere in our elections? Of course they do. Every country on earth, every major country on earth tries to interfere with every other major country on earth's business. That's not a
Not
surprise
Israel.
to any. Yeah, Israel is innocent of everything, right? But I think that they all do, right? I think that you would be you would be naive to not recognize that that's happening. They're all doing it, and nobody on planet Earth does it more or worse than the United States of America. This is not like the US doesn't just maybe pay off some content creators, which there's no doubt that we are doing in Russia and in China and in other locations. But we will literally invade your country, overthrow your democratically elected government, install puppet dictators, and then steal your resources. Like it's not even comparable, right? So again, we don't have all the information. I'm certainly interested to see what comes out, but I'm not making any like rush to judgment here, because the timing of this is very suspect and where the information is coming from is very suspect. So I'm very interested to see how it plays out, but I do think that there's been a very coordinated attack on RT, on Sputnik, which, just full disclosure, I appear on both on a fairly regular basis. I've never been told what to say. I've never been paid to say anything. I've never been paid for an appearance on any of those programs.
Well, everyone who I've ever spoken with who's ever been on RT, they've effectively said
You
the
don't,
same thing. They said
yeah,
they've never been told what to say, and they've
no,
never done any kind of pre-interview because I guess a lot of U.S.
no,
corporate media, they like to vet what you're going to say before you're actually on. RT
no.
never actually
I
does
will
that.
say the most I've ever gotten is when I appear on Crosstalk. They will send me just some bullet points. Hey, this is what we're going to talk about. Like, these are the questions. And I like that as somebody who's appearing. That's very helpful. Sometimes, for example, when I'm on Critical Hour with Garland Nixon and Dr. Wilmer Leon, they'll send me articles. Hey, these are the articles we're going to be covering. And I like that as somebody who's appearing on a show, because then I can come in prepared and I know what we're discussing and I can be educated on the subject so it can make some sense. But it's never like, hey, we're covering this article, here's what you need to say. That's never. And I know many people who have previously worked at RT or who still work at RT. I know many people who work on Sputnik, Jamal Thomas and Malik Abdul, Garland Nixon and Dr. Wilmer Leon, Rachel Blevins, Lee Camp. There's a whole host of people. And I've, like you, they have all said the same thing. They've never been told. I think Rachel has said that her boss will give her maybe certain stories that he'd like to see covered through the week or whatever, but that's normal. I've worked
Yeah,
in
right.
radio.
What
That's
what media
normal.
organization doesn't do
Right.
that?
Yeah. Hey, these are the stories we need to, especially when you're managing a network like that, you need to make sure that, not all the focus is going on these stories and this stuff's getting left out. So you want to make sure things get spread out. So that's a totally normal experience, but I've never been told what to say on RT or Sputnik. I've never been paid to be on either of those networks. I like going on those shows. I think that RT and Sputnik offer an alternative perspective that we're not getting through mainstream media in this country. So again, I'm not rushing to judgment. I'm not, I think that the timing is interesting. And with the insane amounts of censorship and the way that the US is seemingly seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism, I am incredibly suspect about the validity of these claims.
Well, Misty, I really do appreciate you being on the show today and helping me kick off my 10th season. For folks
Yeah.
out there who would like to follow you and support you, how can they do that?
So right now I'm just mostly on Twitter. I was doing shows, but honestly, I just got kind of burnt out on it.
It
Um,
happens.
well, I mean, I'm not a hustler. Like, I'm not good at, I like don't like asking for favors. I don't like asking people to come on my shows. I don't like hyping my own stuff. Like, all of it's very icky to me. So I'm not very good at it. So like I'm okay as a host, but the whole like the hustle side of it, I'm not good at that stuff. So I haven't really been all that involved in my own stuff, but I do make regular appearances on, I mean, today I'll be on Critical Hour. Oh, I guess we're recording this, so I don't know when this will go out, but I make regular appearances on like Fault Lines, Critical Hour, The Backstory, Crosstalk, things like that. So, but I tweet about all that stuff when I'm on there. So just generally, Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust is mostly where you can find me now.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time today. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully I can have you back again on sometime soon.
I would love it, and welcome back. It's good to have you back.